Alright, so today we're going to start tearing the motor apart. I took the spark plugs out already because I wanted to read what the motor was doing, if it was like a air to fuel ratio or an oil issue, and why it blew up. So first things first, one spark plug was a bit too clean for my liking, the other one was a bit too dirty for my liking. So anyways, we're gonna tear it apart, see what actually really happened. So the first things first, we're gonna take off our exhaust system. We're gonna take out the full thing, and we're gonna put it off in the corner for storage. So what you're gonna need is either a spring puller, or say
Rope or a zip tie.
a rope or a zip tie, yeah. You can take a rope and you can wrap it in behind the spring. This one's a bit big, so it won't go through, but you could take a smaller zip tie or something, get it in behind, pull it off, or take a pair of needle nose vice grips, clamp it on, and then you're gonna pull it off. And then they just unhook. So we're gonna go ahead and finish removing the rest of the exhaust system, and we'll come back with our next step. Okay, so we got our exhaust off. We're gonna try and suck out a bit of coolant there so it doesn't spill all the way down in. We got a transfer pump, manual transfer pump, bought it down at PA. They're about 20 bucks a little pump. So we're just gonna go and suck out some of the coolant out of the reservoir. If this pump will work, we're gonna find out. Oh yeah, there we go. So we got an old windshield washer jug that we're using. We're gonna transfer the coolant down in there, see how much we can get out. See if I can't get down in further. I think that's pretty much it for the reservoir. Then we'll be able to pull off our top hose. We're going to take apart the motor inside the sled to see if it's the top end. If it's not the top end, then we'll have to pull the motor and do the bottom end. So after this here, we're going to disconnect this hose. We're going to suck a bit more, see if we can't suck a bit more fluid, coolant out of here, and try and drain the block a little bit so we don't make too much of a mess. And maybe disconnect one of these hoses, pull that off, drain more out the bottom. Okay, so follow up in our next step there before too long. Alright, so we got our coolant hoses off. Put our coolant into an old windshield washer jug so it doesn't spill all over the floor. Probably won't reuse it. Some guys, you can probably reuse it. If the coolant still looks pretty decent, you could reuse it. In my case, it hasn't been changed in a few years, so I'm going to change it out while I got everything apart. But for that, we're going to start taking the head off the motor. So you're going to, well, in this scenario, it's an 11 mil bolt. So we're going to start taking them apart. You don't want to go too hard on them right away, just in case you do snap them off if they're seized in. Best to start everything by hand. Now when you put this all back together, there will be a torque sequence. Make sure you look up your torque sequence so you're not warping your head. There's actually a removal procedure too, but I don't think we'll be doing any damage by doing what we're doing right now. So once I get this head all off, we'll show you what the inside of the motor looks like. Yeah. bolts out, we're going to remove the head, see what the pistons and the dome of the head looks like. So I've already got this head off, so I'm just going to show you how to do it. It was stuck on there pretty good, so you give it a couple hits on the sides. Use a rubber hammer because this is aluminum. Aluminum can crack with a steel hammer, but you're going to have, some of them are stuck on pretty good, so you're going to have to use a little bit of grunt. Bang on it some, get it to move, and it'll come off. It's just, there's no dowels or anything inside. It's just a flat surface where your bolts drop down through. You have a gasket here that seals everything in. So, but as of right now, I have one cylinder that looks pretty clean, the other one that looks a little bit dirty. It doesn't look like the domes of the piston are in rough shape. Like, it doesn't look like there's any pitting in it or anything like that. So my assumption was that the bottom end let go in this motor in the beginning, but we wanted to pull the top off just to make sure it wasn't something here. So our next step is probably going to be like tear down, pull the engine right out so we can see if it was at the crank or not, because this motor won't turn over whatsoever. So I'm thinking one of the needle bearings got spun on the connecting rods, and so we'll show you a little bit on how to get this motor out of the machine. You're gonna, first step would be remove your air box. Then we're going to remove our carburetors and get them out of the way, and that should get you down and give you access to the bottom. You'll have to disconnect your pull cord, because your pull cord and stuff is attached to the side, so we'll have to disconnect some things on this side and then be able to get at the mounting bolts. There's a support bracket over here, and then everything should just come up and out. One right there. Yeah, and then you have your motor mounts down in the bottom here. Okay, so we got all the bolts out. We're going to remove the head, see what the pistons and the dome of the head looks like. So I've already got this head off, so I'm just going to show you how to do it. It was stuck on there pretty good, so you give it a couple hits on the sides. Use a rubber hammer because this is aluminum. Aluminum can crack with a steel hammer, but you're going to have, some of them are stuck on pretty good, so you're going to have to use a little bit of grunt. Bang on it some, get it to move, and it'll come off. It's just, there's no dowels or anything inside. It's just a flat surface where your bolts drop down through. You have a gasket here that seals everything in. So, but as of right now, I have one cylinder that looks pretty clean, the other one that looks a little bit dirty. It doesn't look like the domes of the piston are in rough shape. Like, it doesn't look like there's any pitting in it or anything like that. So my assumption was that the bottom end let go in this motor in the beginning, but we wanted to pull the top off just to make sure it wasn't something here. So our next step is probably going to be like tear down, pull the engine right out so we can see if it was at the crank or not, because this motor won't turn over whatsoever. So I'm thinking one of the needle bearings got spun on the connecting rods, and so we'll show you a little bit on how to get this motor out of the machine. You're gonna, first step would be remove your air box. Then we're going to remove our carburetors and get them out of the way, and that should get you down and give you access to the bottom. You'll have to disconnect your pull cord, because your pull cord and stuff is attached to the side, so we'll have to disconnect some things on this side and then be able to get at the mounting bolts. There's a support bracket over here, and then everything should just come up and out. One right there. Yeah, and then you have your motor mounts down in the bottom here. So we disconnected our carburetors from the from the block, and we had to drain our oil because when we took apart our oil line, all our oil that was in our container was coming out the block. So we filled up a container, clean container for 2-stroke oil. And next we're going to remove our full cord assembly and get some of the stuff out of here. And we're going to pull off some electrical, and then we should gain access to our motor mounts, and things should be able to like just be more or less unbolted and lift up and out, and then we'll be able to put it onto the bench. Alright, so we took out our battery, disconnected our battery so we could take off our starter and we wouldn't have any live wires hanging down. So the starter was down here, so we took that off. We had to take off our coil for our pull start, so we took that off. We disconnected our cables, all your cables that go and connect to the motor, then tie into the main wiring harness for the sled. We disconnected those. We had to disconnect our oil injector. There's a cable that comes onto this lever here. We disconnected that. We disconnected the lines that go to the pump. Anything that more or less is connecting to the body of the sled that connects to the motor, we have disconnected on that side. And we're at the point where we can get at our motor mount bolts. So there's one there, there's another one down on the other side, there's another one up front.
Should be one right there, yeah.
And then over here we have like a brace for the motor from twisting. It's just to hold everything, like a torque brace. So we'll have to disconnect that there before we start pulling this off, and then that should be it, and the motor should unbolt and pop out. Alright, so we got our motor out. It's on the floor over there. We had a few wires that were zip tied to the motor mounts, so we had to snip that as we were pulling it out. But there's just 4 bolts that actually hold the motor in. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's all out there now, and so that's how you remove a motor from a snowmobile. And we'll get that motor up on the bench there after a bit, and we'll tear it down to see what actually caused the problem. And you also want to, when you're diagnosing a motor, you also want to see why things have happened the way they happened. So why did this motor blow? How come? Whatever. Because there might be another component that's not feeding oil to your bearings that need to feed oil to your bearings. So you might want to check a couple of the other components to make sure everything's working properly, and it was actually just the bearing that did fail, and not like it was a lack of oil which caused the bearing to fail. So that all being said, we'll throw that on the bench there later on, and we'll come back with another update after we remove some more stuff. And we'll see you after a bit.